All right, let's look at some of the most common mineral imbalances I see in my practice. Slow one with copper imbalances is incredibly common. This is a client that has endometriosis, struggling with bloating, severe period pain, anxiety, and acne. And some of the major highlights from her hair test is just like the main chart from her hair test is that she has very high copper. We can see here really high uranium, very big heavy metal burden on the body, which is a huge tax on the liver that plus the copper can really affect her estrogen levels and inflammation in the body, and that can make uh, endometriosis way worse. Same with anxiety, acne, and period pain. And then she does have very low sodium potassium. That's going to be a big contributor to the bloating. The high calcium just slows down her metabolism and how everything is working. It can make it harder to get nutrients inside the cell, glucose, hormones, all those things. And then she's got low cobalt, which is a sign of very low stomach acid, very low manganese, which is important for estrogen and progesterone and having a good strong ovulation, and then low chromium, which can affect blood sugar. So if we think about what are the big things that are standing out here that are leading to a lot of her symptoms, she has a lot of signs of the poor estrogen clearance. So she's not clearing estrogen from the body well. And then digestive dysfunction, low potassium, low sodium, low manganese, low boron, low cobalt. This can lead to impaired bile flow. Bile is what we use to break down and digest fats and absorb them appropriately. But it's also really important for getting rid of excess copper, excess estrogen, mycotoxins, heavy metals. And so having low levels of those minerals can really impair that. Plus the high copper, obviously we need to get rid of that. Can lead to low stomach acid, methylation issues, which is really common with endometriosis, and then gut motility issues, which can of course lead to the bloating. So we got a very clear picture on her test of like, okay, why are these symptoms happening? Minerals show us the why, and then what can we do about it? We also got a really good look at her significant ratios here. This is on the second page of the hair test. This nervous system ratio is high, so it shows she's stuck in that parasympathetic state. She's not handling stress well. And then the vitality ratio, sodium, potassium, again, poor stress handling. When it's low, it means that she's been chronically stressed for a while. And then the high calcium potassium ratio, this is the thyroid ratio. This does not tell you that you're not making enough thyroid hormone. It tells you how you're using it. So her ratio is very high. This means that she's not using thyroid hormone well, and this is why she's got a lot of symptoms that match up with hypothyroidism, like the bloating, like anxiety, like the estrogen progesterone imbalance. And then her zinc copper is very low, so excess copper is really just antagonizing zinc because if one is high, it can push the other one out of balance, and this will contribute to excess estrogen and progesterone resistance, and that's huge with endometriosis and symptoms. So supporting her minerals is going to also help support how her body's using progesterone. Her adrenal ratio, sodium magnesium, is very low, showing her adrenals are exhausted. And then her calcium magnesium ratio, this blood sugar ratio, is high, which shows she's much more likely to be on a blood sugar roller coaster all day, which is also going to contribute to her anxiety. So she used HTMA to streamline her healing. She identified her big copper imbalance, identified not using thyroid hormone well, identified how to fix her digestion, and then I was able to identify that she does have a big heavy metal load. And once she knew it was uranium, and then she knows, okay, now I know a binder to use. So instead of following a cookie cutter protocol for endometriosis, she made one to fit her exact needs. And this is the most important takeaway. And I think there's definitely helpful general recommendations for women that have specific health conditions like endo, like PCOS, menopause, all those things. But each woman has her own unique needs. And that's what mineral testing helps us identify. Another one is fast 4 with depleted minerals. So if we look at her calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, they're all low. This would pretty much be considered a 4 lows pattern. And so it just means that she's very depleted. And this client was struggling with PCOS. She had very irregular cycles, high cholesterol, eczema, asthma, allergies, anxiety, depression, low energy, low libido, and trouble staying asleep. And then, bloating, gas, digestive issues. So we can see her first 4 minerals are depleted. This is a sign she's been stressed for a long time. She's definitely in burnout. She also likely has some hidden copper imbalances because her manganese is low. Her molybdenum is also low. And then her sulfur is trending low and very low boron. The 2 arrows mean that the mineral was so low that it couldn't be measured. So she has 2 of those, potassium and boron. She's also still moving mercury, even though her minerals are low. So you need minerals to help support your detox pathways. So whenever I see low minerals and heavy metals are still being moved, she likely has a very high toxic load, even more than we're seeing here. And overall, I think that her minerals are definitely contributing to the digestive issues like the low manganese, cobalt, molybdenum, sodium, potassium. Those can all affect her digestion. And then her significant ratios, we can see that she has a lower calcium potassium, that nervous system ratio. So she's more stuck in fight or flight, which matches up with her chronic like burnout that we're seeing on her hair test. Her vitality ratio is very low. Again, shows like her adrenals aren't working properly. She's been stressed for a while. And then her calcium potassium, her thyroid ratio is very high. So this can really worsen PCOS symptoms and contribute to low energy. So she's just not able to get that thyroid hormone inside the cell well. Her potassium was super low, which is a big part of that. And then zinc copper balance, her ratio is elevated. So she probably has some stored copper going on. And then really low adrenal ratio. So adrenals are absolutely exhausted. No wonder she's not reacting well to stress, has low energy. And her calcium magnesium blood sugar ratio is a little high, and it could definitely be contributing to more anxiety, likely from stress, and just insulin signaling is slower. The low magnesium means the cells aren't as sensitive to insulin. So that could definitely contribute to a lot of her symptoms as well. I'm also including her iron blood work because iron's a really big piece of the puzzle when it comes to PCOS. Iron overload hers is likely related to her irregular cycles because she is not having as much blood loss, which is how we get rid of iron. And women absorb more iron than men because we bleed every month typically. And women with PCOS, they have lower levels of a protein called hepcidin, and that regulates iron. So this means you're going to have more iron absorption, and eventually you can have excess iron. I see this all the time, not even in women that have regular cycles in PCOS. And so high iron, it really mimics a lot of the PCOS symptoms that are already present. It makes insulin resistance worse, makes inflammation worse, leads to more gut issues, it feeds pathogens, leads to high cholesterol, and it worsens eczema, allergies, and asthma and acne, all of which she has. So those are like the really big things. And so we can see her iron levels are 141. Her iron saturation is 41%. Ideally, iron's closer to 100 and iron saturation is like 25 to 35. So definitely high. Hemoglobin's high. Ideally, it's closer to 13.5. Copper is elevated. So remember, her copper on her hair test was low, but her zinc was high, but her manganese and her molybdenum were low, which really is giving us the indicator that she probably has some copper stored. And on her blood, it's actually elevated. So this is likely from inflammation and thyroid and adrenal dysfunction, and contributing to her estrogen dominant symptoms. So just so you can kind of see how can we use like blood work for iron, which is very important for PCOS, and then utilize that and compare it to a hair test. So HDMA really streamlined her healing because she was able to identify her mineral deficiencies, which were huge, right? She had very low levels of minerals. She identified copper issues, and that it was high on her blood, but like on her hair, she was able to see, oh, because I have other minerals that are supposed to be higher to help me use that copper properly. And then it really showed her the why behind her symptoms. And again, like there's generalized PCOS recommendations that I do think can be helpful, but each woman with PCOS is unique. Not every woman with PCOS has insulin sensitivity issues just because their androgens are high. You know, it's like, what about the minerals that are behind that? So her minerals levels directly correlate to her symptoms, and they helped her actually avoid getting on a statin, which was one of her major goals. Okay, the last pattern, calcium shell. So calcium shell is when calcium is greater than 170 on an HTMA. This is often accompanied by a really high calcium magnesium blood sugar ratio, really high thyroid ratio, and really low vitality ratios, that sodium potassium ratio. The calcium basically isn't being used properly. It's stuck in the tissue. It's not available for bones, for muscles, or metabolism. So typically when we have this kind of calcium that's not available for use, it's going to build up because of really low adrenal function, emotional shutdown, or some sort of trauma. So it could be like one really big traumatic event that led to the really high calcium in the calcium shell, or just like over time, other minerals and adrenals being super taxed, chronic stress, and then you have calcium shell. Excess copper is usually a big part of this as well. And then liver stagnation, not having good bile flow. Again, bile is so important. I feel like no one talks about bile, and it's so important for healthy hormone levels, for good fat absorption, and healthy fat soluble vitamin levels, and also for keeping minerals in a good place. So when we think of calcium shell, we really think of it as it's literally a protective wall, a shell or armor that's like biochemically and emotionally keeping you safe, because it'll make you feel very numb. And typically women that have calcium shells are very not connected to their bodies. If you ask them, like, try to listen to your body, there's no communication happening there, and it can be really hard for them. And you can often pinpoint it back to like a stressful event or just over time chronic stress. So how I address these is I avoid further calcium supplementation. I know some people are like, you can use calcium for calcium shell because people might feel better in the short term, but in the long term, it doesn't fix the problem. I support it with cofactors because that's the thing. Like, just like high copper, like, we don't have to be afraid of a high mineral level. We have to understand, okay, what are the cofactors for that mineral that are going to help my body use it properly? That's magnesium, that's vitamin K2, vitamin A, taurine, and then liver support is critical. And then I will typically utilize iodine eventually after we've already worked very hard on calcium. And you can use hair tests to assess your iodine status as well. This client, they stopped their vitamin D supplementation and a few other supplements. They worked on their circadian rhythm and getting good morning light, blocking blue light at night. They started eating breakfast, which was huge because she did not have an appetite in the morning. But she worked on that with her light exposure and eventually started to get an appetite. And then slowly started to work on consistent lunch and dinner. She used a food journal to kind of see what's the best approach for her. And she really worked on her daily habits to just avoid being a stress ball. And that's like her phrase of how she affectionately referred to herself, not mine. But that was her demeanor. And so we did some strategic supplements. We used magnesium, vitamin K2, cod liver oil for vitamin A, taurine, boron, selenium, and some liver support. And eventually we added iodine, but it wasn't until she already had a really, really solid foundation first. And she went from extreme fatigue and hypothyroid symptoms to waking up with the sun, having daily bowel movements, and ultimately feeling like herself again.